Guys, what's going on? First video of 2025, Mike Sunday here. Just wanted to kick this one off with another camera video. Sorry that last year, I wasn't able to get out as many videos as I want. I tried to focus on vlogging, and I kind of got caught in this backlog trying to edit all this footage from Japan, and it was a little bit daunting, to be honest. So I'm gonna try this year to get back to sort of more talking head videos, talking to the camera, talking to you guys, and just shorter form videos talking about things I like. Wanted to talk about this little guy, the Ricoh GR IIIx. It's been my trusty travel companion for the last year and a bit. One of my videos that I had spoken about how I use a flash for all my photography with the Ricoh. It did quite well. Got a lot of comments, people asking questions. I've actually sort of taken the opposite approach now, and I'm using a film sim on this and only JPEGs. I think this was best demonstrated with my most recent trip to Japan, which was almost a year ago. So I wanted to get this video out, but I thought we could take this time to walk through some of those photos, talk through some of the quirks, and why I actually am moving away from the Ricoh GR. I think it's I've outgrown it a little bit. I'll talk about my thoughts here. I know it's such a hyped camera on the internet, but I think I want to get a new tool for my next upcoming travels this year. So let's get into it. The first thing that's worth noting is that I used a film simulation. It was created by a content creator named Adrian. I'm going to link the video in the description. It was one of his film recipes called Cotton Color 400, and I slightly modified the white balance to make the reds pop a little bit more, and I think I upped the contrast a bit. But that was part of the no editing raw type of mentality. I just wanted to make sure I got everything correct in the box so that I could just sort of export them very quickly, because I realized that I honestly don't really like editing photos that much. So any work that I can do inside the camera is a plus. And then secondly, what has changed since my flash video is I would often shoot full manual or aperture priority. I've actually switched to shutter priority, and the reason is because this awesome camera has in-body stabilization in it, so I'm able to capture a little bit more of that motion, and I'll point some of that out as we go through some of the photos. So why don't we get into it? 2025, back with the camera video, back with some photo videos, and then I'll close with some of my thoughts as to why I think I'm going to be moving on with this camera. Okay, so kicking off here, when we first landed, Japan itself obviously has amazing lighting, so it's kind of hard to take bad photos. But one of my gripes, and this video was sort of inspired by me meeting up with my friend Vlad, and him and I were talking, and this is an opinion I've actually held about the camera, the Ricoh GR, for a little bit now, but it's so popular on the internet, and I actually find that it's hard to take a good photo with it. It's not a camera you can just sort of pick up and just everything be auto and it all be willy-nilly good. So when he had said that to me, I was like, oh my God, I've been thinking that for a while, but I've been afraid to admit it because everyone on the internet says it's such a good camera. Here you can see that it is a light monster. So when the lighting is great, here's a portrait of my friend Ryan, and the lighting is very directional, I find that's when you sort of get the best results. So here's, you can see the film sim in full effect, and it just has a great warm saturation around some of the reds and the yellows. As we flip through here, it was a rainy day, but the GR IIIx did phenomenally. I do really like the 43 millimeter focal length, but I think for my next trip I want to switch it up a little bit and get a bit of a wider shot, and I'll explain a little bit more of that later. Here you can see at Asakusa just how much the reds sort of pop, and you can see the clarity of the images. It's actually quite remarkable how sharp this camera can render stills considering its size, and I think that's one of the things that I'm going to miss the most about this camera is just how inconspicuous it is. And so for a lot of the street shots here, I love this one. You can see how dramatic the lighting is. You can see the shadows are long, sort of pulling across in the same direction as the markings on the street. No one ever really bats an eye at this camera, and my new camera is quite big. I have a feeling that people won't feel the same. But here, as a common theme, when I talked about shooting at sort of 1/15 or 1/, what are the options? I think 30 for my shutter speed. With the in-body stabilization, this is an effect that you're able to achieve, and what it does is that obviously the things that are in motion, that are moving quite rapidly, give you sort of this sense of movement. It's not super blurry, but you can see some movement lines, but the things in the background or the things in the foreground that aren't moving tend to stay relatively still and sharp. So that's an effect that I really have loved using with this camera, and it's something that I'll miss dearly because my new camera doesn't have in-body stabilization. As you can see here, because it's fairly tight. I would say it's fairly tight. I was able to maintain a good distance away from capturing these people, just enjoying their everyday life. It just allows you to capture sort of these intimate moments, especially when you're sort of doing this street photography style, which I always I'm a fan of. I love capturing people. You can see here it was a little overcast, so it's struggling a little bit. Here are some cars, and I just sort of love the vibe of these photos. It kind of has to me, these have like a 90s almost CD cover type of feel. So you can really feel the motion, and while yes, it isn't the crispiest image on the planet, I actually think there's a lot more emotion and motion behind it. So something that I really enjoyed shooting. It was a new technique for me, and I'm really stoked on how it sort of turned out. Just having that slight kind of motion, I think, really adds a different type of characteristic to the image that I wasn't getting before. Of course, when I was using flash, because it would render the photos in such a still manner. But two, when I was shooting aperture priority, generally it would prioritize a fairly fast shutter rate, which didn't allow for any sort of motion bleeding. You'll notice too, because the camera, I know subconsciously it's because a lot of these I knew I wanted to post on Instagram, so I shot a lot vertically. But because the camera itself is so light, I was able to shoot vertically quite a bit on my new camera. Because it's a lot heavier, I tend to sort of just use it normally. So I'm curious to see how that sort of shakes out when I use it a little bit more. But this one I really love, almost the neon contrast, and this is where sort of the film simulation comes into play. I know everyone goes crazy for the Fuji film sims. Obviously, they're great. They're the best in the biz. The Ricoh film simulations are a little bit more subtle, but yeah, I mean, if you own the Ricoh, I would highly recommend you trying them for yourself. There's a lot of flexibility, and you can get some really, really great results, as you can see here. I don't know if it's just the shininess of Japan, but everything just seems to be clean, whether it's the cars or the glasses or the bottles. So there's always just like a lovely shine to them. Also, the light tends to be quite directional, so you get a lot of sort of specular highlights and things like hard shadows that tend to be very photographic, in my opinion, or photogenic, I should say. So as we're going here, you can see just a lot of detail. The camera does struggle a bit in low light, especially when it gets quite dark. I would say that the ISO tends to become quite unsightly, so you're not going to see a ton of low light photos here. But here's us going through a Metasando. Here's the VisVim shop. And you can just sort of see how it treats the light roll-off. Originally, I wanted this camera because it was similar to my Contax T2 in terms of focal length, and I still love that focal length without a doubt, but I'm embracing some new more digital tools, I suppose. So on my new camera, I'll be cropping quite a bit. Here's an interesting one where you can sort of see the roll off into the blown out sky here. I think this actually looks quite nice, and compositionally, I think it looks pretty cool. It has a macro mode. I don't think this was actually shot on macro, but if you're into shooting sort of close-up things, you'll have no issue with that. So the Ricoh GR on average, it's just a monster, and you can see here, as long as you're shooting things correctly, even though the lighting was fairly low in here, you can see the skin tones are fairly attractive, I would say, without too much editing. And like, again, I would like to iterate that all of these are JPEGs. All of these are straight out of the camera, no editing, just using film simulation and trying to get things correct in the box. I think that there is a tendency to try and just say, okay, we'll capture it. My RAWs are, super flexible. There's a lot of information in the shadows and highlights. I'll be able to recover it. I wasn't interested in that. I knew I was going to be snapping a lot of photos. So I was more fixated on making sure that everything was correct in the box, and more so embracing how it was at the time. So even if the photo didn't turn out, I haven't included necessarily some of the really bad photos, but this one, for example, here in the rain, I wouldn't say this is a great photo, but this is how it was. Underexposed, pretty blurry. It kind of takes me back to the moment a little bit more than manicuring such a curated photo or experience. So even here you can see, I wouldn't say this was mega low light, but because I was able to shoot at mega slow shutter speeds due to the in-body stabilization, able to get salvageable photos from this bar. But like I said, this thing is not a low light monster by any means. And when I had taken it to my most recent trip, which was my friend's wedding, it really struggled, and it did, I think, show the flaws in trying to use this camera outside of a street perspective. Those were the things. Those were some of the decisions behind why I was actually decided to take this approach. So you can see here, really focused on the film sim to bump up the reds. Red is one of my favorite colors, and there's a lot of red in Japan, go figure. So being able to have that pop in the film simulations, I think is great. Generally, the lighting was really great, as I've been saying multiple times. So that's kind of why I was able to get such successful results. This is one of my favorite photos here. This is this was outside one of the hotels, and it just sort of framed itself in a way as we sort of stepped out and this car passed. If I was to do this in post, I'd probably straighten out all the perspective lines, but I think this is a great photo. I just really like it. Here we see a cat, and you can see sort of that really dramatic lighting. I think I bumped up the contrast a little bit from the original recipe, but I think in retrospect, I would probably dial it back a bit. It worked well in Japan just because the lighting is so dramatic, and a lot of the time, especially here, for example, something like this, there's often light sort of peeking through the, like windows and stuff, creating sort of these dramatic shapes. But in Toronto, in gloomy old Toronto where I'm at, when I take it day to day, it does not work as well. So I had to sort of revert back, and I'm using the generic positive film simulation, I believe now. Just being, more present and remembering how it was, I think is kind of a more special idea than necessarily trying to make it perfect. Lots of architecture. Obviously, the architecture is stunning and it's beautiful. My next trip that I'm going to Japan will be less in the city. Not that these are in the city, but I'm really excited to get back there and shoot more photos. I think, like many people, it's one of my favorite places to shoot photos. Here, the lighting was pretty crappy, and you can see that my friends were sunburned because we spent the whole day previously outside. But still, like the skin tones are decent, I would say. Nothing too crazy. It's a little unflattering on the face, and with some of the ways the shadows were being cast, and I don't know if that was because of the film sim or just the lighting was bad, but take that with a grain of salt. But I do find that this camera shoots much better outside. The interesting thing about shooting with a tighter field of view, especially when you're shooting architecture stuff like this, is it really puts the focus on composition, and you can't just sort of shoot willy-nilly and then crop in. It really sort of trains your eye, I think. So all that to be said, it's funny because I'm going back to a wider fixed lens for my next camera. So yeah, we'll see how that goes. I'd be curious to do a comparison video as well. But yeah, this you can see here just the way the oranges render. The greens are a little muted, I would say, but I think if you really like greens, I know the Fuji film sims do a really fantastic job, and that's one of the things that Fuji is known for. Here you can see here some of the wandering lines, all sort of pushing away, and then just that light. If I was to edit this one, I would maybe make even the contrast with the shadows and the light a little bit more dramatic, just because I think it would create some more interesting shapes here. Here you can see that this person isn't razor sharp, but like I said, just embracing how it was and being in the moment. I want to talk about sort of the invasiveness of this camera. You really can just keep it in your pocket and snap virtually anywhere. It doesn't look like much, so people don't ever really feel intimidated. It's almost like the same size as a phone. Actually, it's smaller than your phone, so people never really feel like you are getting in their faces. Oftentimes when I've brought around a bigger camera with a bigger lens, people are more suspect of what you're doing, whether the intentions are good or not. Always, of course, my intentions have been good, but the reality is when you have something that doesn't look like quote unquote a professional tool, you're less likely to sort of elicit a response from someone that would be negative. Here you can see during this rainy day, you get a lot of movement. You can almost sort of feel how dreary this day was, which I love these photos. They're not, I wouldn't say compositionally they're anything special, but it really did sort of capture the mood. So having that slow drag of the people in contrast with some of the sharper elements is something that I will miss about this camera. Also too, you can get effects like this. So as the train was sort of pulling out or coming in, I don't remember which it was, my two friends here, able to get them sort of razor sharp, and in the background obviously you're able to capture the movement. So yeah, this is a really great technique. I really embraced it this trip and had a lot of fun. Yeah, just sort of pushing through here. You can see some more photos. The way I used the film sim, it really did sort of punch in on the reds and the yellows. Those were the colors that I just chose to focus on this trip. But it's almost interesting to sort of self-impose rules or a set of parameters that you want for a trip, and then you can sort of capture it that way. Because it one, it sort of adds a design constraint, but two, it almost gives your trip like this trip, I'll always remember the photos looking this way. And not that you want to necessarily brand each trip, but when you're looking back at your anthology of all your photos, it's, for me at least, it's very obvious to remember which time I was in Japan or whatever, depending on the style of photography or depending on the tool I was using, which is kind of fascinating to be able to recall that. I think it's kind of neat. I don't know if anyone else would be sort of into that mentality. It's a little bit strange when I say it out loud, but these are just types of things, mementos, design constraints that I like to add as a way for me to sort of remember my photography. Here, obviously the detail shots are great, and here's my friend again, just with the motion, seeing how busy people are on their phones, and then just us sort of standing still, I think was an apt metaphor for the trip. Two of my friends two out of my 3 friends who I was with had never been to Japan before. So for them, it was just a completely new experience and they were just absorbing it all. So incredible to see Japan through their eyes, and obviously a place that I hold very near and dear to me. So yeah, was happy to be able to share that experience with them. As we sort of come around the bend here, you can see this was our omakase night. So it's starting to struggle a little bit. You're not going to be able to see through the actual fidelity of the video, but you can see in the background here, the ISO is starting to become a little bit, less than desirable. Because the sensor is so small, the grain tends to look very sort of blotchy, which I'm not necessarily a huge fan of. But if you're using your controls correctly, you can still get salvageable photos, even on JPEG, in low light situations. So I think, the elephant in the room, and what I had said before, is this is a beloved camera by many people in the community, especially on YouTube. It's very hyped. People sort of often compare it to the Fujifilm X100 series, the 6 most recently, I think. And I've used that camera. That camera is, I would say, on a much different caliber than this one. Unfortunately, the focal lengths are obviously different, but that camera you can really pick up and have fun, and you can set it full auto and just have some incredible captures. I would argue that this camera is not quite as simple. You have to be so conscious of the shadows and highlights. They so often blow out, and it just doesn't make the photos look good. And I'm not even talking about trying to make it look like film, or it looks inherently digital, but it is not a camera, I think, for amateurs, and I think it is often advertised as something that you can just sort of grab and start creating these amazing images. You can obviously create fantastic photos, and if you search Ricoh GR on YouTube, you will find a million different instances of why this camera is great. And I think it is still a great camera. But for me personally, I would like to hear more discourse around the quirks and why it's actually not as simple to use. It'll always hold a special place in my heart. It was my main camera for a number of years. But I think at this point in time, I'm just interested in branching out, trying something new. And so that's why my new camera, especially for my travels, is going to be my Leica Q3. I just purchased that. I just picked that up. That came out last year. It's a much different camera and a much different price point. So we'll see if it's worth it. Maybe one day we'll do a comparison video. But for the time being, this will probably be the last video I create on the Ricoh GR. It's been a great ride. I don't know if I'm going to sell it. It's a great camera to keep, super useful. But yeah, thanks for sticking with me throughout this video. This is the first video of 2025. Hopefully I'll be able to bring you more sort of talking head videos. I think that's something I'm interested in. I'm going to try and lean out of vlogging a bit. I'll probably do a vlog here and there, but so many cool things to talk about, lots of things, thinking about talking about watches, talking about some of my jewelry, and just some more gadgets, talking about things in the office. If there's anything that you wanted to see in particular in 2025, leave a comment, let me know. If not, drop a like, subscribe, really helps the channel. Appreciate you all. Be safe. Happy shooting. Mike Sunday out.